The doctor said the word treatment, and my children said nothing. That silence hurt more than the diagnosis itself. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, holding the paper with trembling hands, reading numbers I could never afford. I wasn't asking for miracles. I wasn't asking for luxury. Just help. Just a chance to keep living a little longer. I told myself it wouldn't be hard for them. After all, they were my children. I called one first. They listened carefully, then sighed and said the timing was bad. I called another. They promised to think about it. Days passed. Then weeks. My phone stayed quiet, as if my illness had made me inconvenient. I didn't cry at first. I made excuses for them instead. They had families, responsibilities, busy lives. That's what mothers do. We protect our children, even when they're the ones hurting us. But late at night, when the house was dark and my pain grew louder, one question refused to leave me alone. How did I become so easy to ignore? The answer came unexpectedly. Not from my children. From my brother. An old voice on the phone, tired but steady. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't hesitate. He simply said, "You're not alone." And in that moment, I realized something that would change how I saw my family forever. After my brother sent the money, I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't feel relief right away. What I felt was shame. Not for asking, but for realizing who answered and who didn't. I decided to tell my children. Not to accuse them. Not to make them feel guilty. Just to be honest. I believed honesty might still save something between us. One of them said, "That's good. At least someone helped." Another changed the subject completely, as if my illness were an awkward detail best avoided. No one asked how I was feeling. No one asked if I was scared. I hung up the phone and sat quietly, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt like a reminder that time was moving forward, with or without their concern. I began to remember things I had pushed aside for years. The nights I went without sleep so they could rest. The money I never spent on myself. The words "I'm fine" that I said too often. I realized something painful. My children had grown used to my strength. They believed I would always manage. Always endure. Always survive silently. But illness has a way of exposing the truth. It strips away assumptions and leaves only reality. And my reality was this. The person who stood beside me was not the one I had raised, but the one who grew up beside me. That night, I stopped waiting for calls that would never come. And for the first time, I allowed myself to see my family clearly, without excuses. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. Not hope. Not anger. Just clarity. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I already knew what it would show: nothing. I thought about how often I had said, "Don't worry about me." How many times I had smiled through pain so my children wouldn't feel burdened. Somewhere along the way, they believed me too well. They learned that my needs were optional. One of them finally called. Their voice was light, almost cheerful. They talked about work, about plans, about small problems that suddenly felt so distant from my reality. When I mentioned my treatment, there was a pause. Then an uncomfortable laugh. "You're strong," they said. "You'll manage." Those words stayed with me long after the call ended. You'll manage. As if strength were endless. As if love didn't require action. Later that day, my brother came to see me. He brought groceries I hadn't asked for and medicine I couldn't afford. He moved slowly, his hands shaking slightly from age, yet every movement carried care. He never once said, "I helped you." He acted as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Watching him, I felt something break inside me, and something else quietly heal. I understood then that family isn't measured by blood alone, but by who shows up when fear is louder than pride. That evening, I looked at old photographs of my children. I still loved them. I always would. But love, I finally understood, doesn't protect you from disappointment. And motherhood does not guarantee gratitude. That evening, I did something I had avoided my entire life. I stopped protecting my children from the truth. I sat alone at the table and imagined what I would say if they were all in front of me. Not angry words. Not accusations. Just honesty. The kind that trembles in your chest before it reaches your lips. I realized I had trained them well. Too well. I taught them that I needed nothing. That I could survive on little. That my pain was quiet and manageable. I turned myself into someone easy to overlook, then wondered why no one stopped to look. When my phone rang, I didn't rush to answer. For the first time, I let it ring. I wanted to see if silence would worry them the way theirs had worried me. It didn't. Later, one of them finally messaged, "Are you okay?" I stared at the words for a long time. I wanted to say, "No," I wanted to say, "I'm scared." I wanted to say, "I needed you." Instead, I wrote nothing. Because in that moment, I understood something painfully simple. If I had to explain my pain, then it had already been dismissed. Love that waits to be convinced is not love, it's obligation. My brother called that night. He didn't ask questions. He just listened as I breathed on the other end of the line. "Rest," he said softly. And for the first time in days, I slept without fear. That night, I accepted a truth I had resisted for years. Sometimes the people who owe you nothing give you everything, and the ones you gave everything to give you excuses. A few days later, I received a message that I will never forget. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. One of my children wrote, "Let us know how it goes. Not are you okay? Not do you need anything? Just let us know." I read that sentence over and over again. It sounded polite, reasonable, but behind it, I felt a distance so wide I didn't know how we ever crossed it before. My illness had become an update, not a concern. A detail, not a fear. I suddenly remembered myself at their age. How I would have run, not walked, if my mother needed help. How sleep, work, money, none of it would have mattered. Love made choices easy back then. I wondered when love became complicated. My brother came again that afternoon. He noticed things others didn't. An empty fridge, an unpaid bill, the way I winced when I stood up. He never made me feel like a burden. He made me feel worth the effort. After he left, I sat by the window and watched people pass by. Each of them carried their own lives, their own worries. And yet, someone had chosen to stop for me. That's when it finally settled in my heart. My children didn't refuse me because they couldn't help. They refused because my pain no longer interrupted their lives. And once you understand that, something inside you goes very quiet and very cold. For a while, I tried to save them in my own mind. I told myself they were busy, that life had become harder, that everyone was tired, overwhelmed, stretched too thin. I repeated these excuses like prayers, hoping they would bring me peace. But excuses lose their power when reality keeps knocking. One evening, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. A casual phone call, a cheerful voice, laughter spilling through the room. Plans for a trip. A new purchase. A celebration. Life moving forward untouched. I sat there quietly, holding my cup with both hands, and felt something heavy settle in my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was understanding. They didn't help me because they didn't have extra. They didn't help me because I was no longer a priority. That realization hurt more than any harsh word ever could. Silence, I learned, is a decision. And theirs had been made long before I got sick. My brother noticed the change in me. "You're quieter," he said gently. I wanted to tell him that I had finally heard enough. That my heart was tired of waiting for footsteps that never came. That night I stopped hoping. Not in a dramatic way. Hope simply slipped away, quietly, like someone closing a door without a sound. And strangely, without hope, I felt lighter. Painful, yes, but clear. I no longer wondered what they would do. I knew. I didn't plan the conversation. It happened because silence had grown too heavy to carry. One of my children finally came to visit. They hugged me quickly, carefully, as if afraid to touch something fragile. We sat across from each other, the space between us filled with things neither of us wanted to name. They spoke first. About work. About stress. About how expensive everything had become. I listened quietly, nodding, letting the words pass over me like distant noise. Then there was a pause, and they looked at me with a practiced concern. "You didn't really expect us to cover all of that, did you?" The question landed softly, and still broke something inside me. I looked at their face and searched for the child I once knew. The one who ran to me when afraid. The one who believed I could fix anything. I wondered when I had stopped being someone worth running to. "I expected nothing," I said slowly. "I only hoped." They sighed, relieved, as if my answer had freed them from something uncomfortable. They spoke about responsibility, about fairness, about how everyone has limits. Not once did they ask how scared I had been. Not once did they mention the word pain. When they left, they said, "Take care of yourself." As if I hadn't been doing that my entire life. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. That was the moment I understood. They didn't feel guilty. They felt justified. And that truth hurt more than any refusal ever could. After that visit, I waited. Not desperately. Just quietly. I thought maybe the others would call once they heard. Maybe someone would ask what really happened or how I was holding up. No one did. Days passed, measured by pills and appointments. My phone stayed where it was, face down on the table, untouched. I realized that silence doesn't always mean ignorance. Sometimes it means agreement. One of them sent a short message in the family chat. A joke. A harmless picture. Everyone reacted with laughing icons, as if nothing serious existed beyond that screen. I watched it happen like an outsider, reading words that had nothing to do with fear, hospitals, or me. That's when it became clear. My illness was inconvenient. It disrupted the version of family they preferred. Light, distant, uncomplicated. And instead of facing it, they stepped around it. My brother noticed my hands shaking more often. He didn't ask why. He just held them until they stopped. No speeches. No explanations. Just presence. I thought about how different love can look. Loud promises versus quiet action. Words that comfort the speaker, and actions that comfort the one in pain. That night, I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped comparing. I understood that people don't always fail you because they are cruel. Sometimes they fail you because caring would cost them something they are unwilling to give. And with that understanding came a painful calm. I knew now where I stood, and who was truly standing with me. The letter arrived on a quiet afternoon, folded neatly, my name written in a familiar hand. For a second my heart betrayed me. I thought it was from one of my children. Hope is stubborn like that. It survives even when it shouldn't. It wasn't. It was from the hospital. A reminder. Another date. Another amount I needed to pay. I sat there staring at the paper, realizing how strange it was that strangers knew more about my condition than my own family did. That's when a memory surfaced, sharp and unexpected. Years ago, one of my children had needed help. Not life or death. Just comfort. Just support. I remembered how I had borrowed money without thinking twice. How fear for them erased every doubt. I didn't ask if it was fair. I didn't calculate what it would cost me. I acted. And now, here I was doing calculations alone. My brother called later that day. I told him about the letter. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We'll handle it. We." As if this fight belonged to both of us. After the call, I sat by the window again. But this time I wasn't watching people. I was watching myself, the woman I had been, and the one I was becoming. I understood something painful but freeing. Love given without limits does not always return the same way. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me honest. And honesty, I learned, changes everything that comes after. That night, I made a decision that felt both cruel and necessary. I stopped reaching out. No more updates. No gentle reminders. No silent hope that someone would suddenly remember they had a mother who was afraid. I didn't announce it. I simply withdrew, the way people do when they finally understand their place. It wasn't punishment. It was protection. I focused on my treatment, on small routines that gave my days shape. Morning tea. Short walks. Rest when my body demanded it. I learned how to be careful with myself in ways I never had before. All my life, care had flowed outward. Now it turned inward, awkward, unfamiliar, but real. My brother noticed. "You don't talk about them anymore," he said gently. "I've said everything," I answered. And I meant it. Strangely, the silence didn't grow heavier. It grew clearer. Without expectation, disappointment had nothing to feed on. I stopped imagining apologies that would never come. I stopped rehearsing conversations I would never have. One evening, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked older, tired. But there was something else too, a firmness I had never allowed myself before. I understood then that love does not mean endless self-erasure. And motherhood does not require quiet suffering to be real. Letting go didn't heal my body. But it healed something just as fragile, my dignity. And once I reclaimed that, I knew there would be no turning back. It didn't take long for them to notice my silence. People always do, not when you're hurting but when you stop explaining. One of my children finally called, their voice edged with irritation disguised as concern. "Why didn't you tell us about your last appointment?" they asked, as if information itself had been the problem. I listened calmly. Too calmly. I realized they weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because my quiet had unsettled them. Silence forces people to confront what noise conveniently hides. "I didn't want to bother you," I said. The words tasted different now. Not bitter. Honest. There was a pause. Then a familiar defense. "You know we would help if we could." I almost smiled. Because I knew now, could was never the issue. After the call, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what we had become. Relief because I no longer felt responsible for fixing it alone. My brother came by later with warm soup and tired eyes. He sat beside me, saying nothing, respecting the quiet I had chosen. That kind of respect I learned is rare. That evening, another message appeared in the family chat. A vague question. A careful sentence. No apology. No accountability. Just curiosity wrapped in politeness. And that's when it became clear. My silence had shifted something. Not their hearts but the balance. For the first time they were unsure of me. And for the first time I wasn't afraid of that. The truth didn't come out in anger. It came out tired. One afternoon they gathered again. Not because they wanted to, but because silence had made them uncomfortable. I could see it in their eyes, the way they avoided looking at me directly, as if afraid I might say something they weren't ready to hear. One of them finally asked, "Why are you pushing us away?" I took a slow breath. For once I didn't rush to soften my words. "I'm not pushing you away," I said. I stopped chasing. The room grew quiet. That kind of quiet where no one knows how to argue without exposing themselves. I told them about the nights I lay awake counting pills. About the fear I hid behind calm messages. About the money my brother sent without hesitation, without conditions, without being asked twice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply described reality. They listened, some with surprise, some with discomfort, some with defensiveness. One of them crossed their arms, another stared at the floor. No one interrupted. Not because they agreed, but because they couldn't deny it. "I didn't need perfection," I said softly. "I needed presence." When I finished, no one spoke. And in that silence, I understood something important. Honesty doesn't always heal relationships. Sometimes it just makes the damage visible. But for the first time, the truth belonged to the room, not just to me. Their reactions were not what I had imagined during countless sleepless nights. There were no tears. No sudden apologies. No rush toward me with regret in their eyes. Instead, there were explanations. One of them spoke first, their voice tight. They said they felt attacked. Another said they didn't realize things were that serious. Someone else reminded me of everything they had ever done for me. As if care were a balance sheet that could be settled with old receipts. I listened quietly, noticing how quickly the conversation shifted away from my fear and back to their comfort. It was remarkable, really, how pain can become inconvenient the moment it demands responsibility. Only one of them asked, "Why didn't you say it sooner?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I answered honestly. "I did," I said. "Just not loudly enough." That's when I saw it clearly. They weren't cruel people. But they were deeply uncomfortable with guilt. And so they wrapped themselves in logic, fairness, and distance, anything that would keep them from feeling it fully. My brother sat quietly in the corner, saying nothing. He didn't need to. His presence said more than any defense ever could. When the conversation ended, they left one by one, each carrying their own version of the truth. I remained seated, strangely calm. Something inside me had shifted permanently. I understood then that being heard does not mean being understood. And sometimes saying everything out loud is not the end of pain. It's the end of illusion. After they left, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty, exposed. As if the walls had heard too much and didn't know what to do with it. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't heavy with expectation anymore. It was clean. Final. I realized I was no longer waiting for my children to become someone else. I had finally accepted who they were. Days passed without messages. No follow-up questions. No awkward apologies. And strangely, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt released. When you stop hoping for a version of people that doesn't exist, disappointment loses its power. My brother stayed close. He never spoke about the conversation. He understood that some things don't need commentary, only continuity. He showed up again and again with the same quiet reliability. One evening I found myself laughing at something small. The sound surprised me. It had been a long time since laughter came without guilt. I noticed how much energy I had spent protecting others from discomfort, even when I was the one in pain. I thought about motherhood, how it teaches you to give without counting but never teaches you when to stop. I had crossed that line without realizing it. And now, standing on the other side, I felt older but lighter. That night I wrote nothing. I explained nothing. For the first time, I allowed my story to exist without defending it. And in that quiet acceptance, I understood. Peace does not come from being needed. It comes from being honest with yourself, even when the truth changes everything. Peace is fragile when it's new. I learned that when my phone rang late one evening. It was one of my children. Their voice sounded different, uncertain, almost careful. They said they had been thinking. They said maybe things had gone too far. The words were slow, measured, as if chosen to avoid sharp edges. I listened without interrupting. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I wanted to understand what was really being offered. An apology or relief from guilt. I just wanted to check on you, they said. I thanked them. The politeness surprised us both. There was a pause, then they added, "We didn't mean to hurt you." I believed that. And yet, intention does not erase impact. I realized how easy it is to say the right words once the hardest part is over. Once someone else has already carried the weight. I told them I was managing. Not in the old way meant to comfort. In a new way, factual, grounded. They seemed relieved by that. Relief, I noticed, often matters more to people than repair. After the call, I didn't feel shaken. I felt steady. The peace I had found didn't collapse under their voice. It held. That's when I knew something important had changed. I no longer needed them to understand me in order to respect myself. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future of our relationship might look like, because I had finally stopped building it alone. The next appointment came quietly. No dramatic tension. No urgent calls. Just a date circled on the calendar and my brother waiting by the door, keys in his hand. As we drove, I realized something strange. I wasn't afraid. Not of the results. Not of the future. Fear had lost its sharpness when I stopped carrying it alone. In the waiting room, I watched other families. Children leaning close to their parents. Hands held tightly. Soft words exchanged. For a moment, something old stirred inside me. Not envy, grief. Grief for a version of life I had imagined and never lived. And then it passed. Because I finally understood. Longing for what never was keeps you trapped in what hurts. Letting go sets you free. After the appointment, I didn't call my children. I didn't post updates. I didn't wait. I went home, made tea, and rested. My life no longer needed witnesses to be real. That evening, I looked through old photos. Not with regret, but with closure. I loved my children deeply. That love hadn't disappeared. But it had changed shape. It no longer begged. It no longer chased. I whispered goodbye, not to them but to the version of myself who believed love meant enduring everything in silence. That woman had done her best. But her work was finished. I don't know how much time I have left. The doctors speak carefully, and I've learned to listen between the words. But I do know this. I am no longer afraid of spending that time alone. My children still live their lives. Sometimes they call. Sometimes they don't. I no longer measure my days by their attention. Love that demands constant proof is too heavy to carry at this age. My brother remains. Not loudly. Not heroically. Just consistently. He sits with me in silence, and somehow that silence feels full. Safe. Enough. I used to believe that being a good mother meant giving until nothing was left. Now I understand how wrong I was. A good mother also teaches, even if the lesson comes late. Even if it is painful. Even if it is learned through absence. If my children ever understand what they lost, I hope it doesn't crush them. I hope it softens them. And if they never do, that is something I have finally released. I made peace with my story. Not because it was fair, but because it was honest. When the house is quiet at night, I no longer wait for footsteps. I listen to my own breathing and remind myself of a simple truth I learned too late, but not too late to matter. Family is not who you give your life to. Family is who shows up when your life is on the line. And in that knowing I rest.